Okay, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Here is what I was planning to do this morning. I am sending you a virtual invitation to a virtual dinner. In other words, there won't be a real dinner, but we'll imagine we're having one. We are going to imagine that we are going to have a Shabbat dinner together. My focus will be quite different from what we heard the other night. We're not talking about challah recipes. We're talking about challah. There's a difference. We are not talking about the best chicken or brisket recipe that we inherited from our grandparents. I am talking about rituals. And I'm talking about rituals I think that you are all familiar with, but I think we have used language rather sloppily, and I'm trying to get into what I think are the origins and meaning of all of these things. So, for example, I hear often the expression, we're blessing the candles, we're blessing the wine, etc. We're not blessing the candles at all. We're praising God for commanding us to light the lights. We're not blessing the wine. We're praising God for creating the fruit of the vine and for sanctifying the Sabbath. So let me start with Shabbat lights. They don't have to be candles. We used oils and wicks before we had candles. In one of the later chapters of the book of Exodus, it clearly says you're not supposed to start a fire on Shabbat. There were Jews a little over 1,000 years ago who rebelled against standard practice and said, not only are we forbidden to light a fire on Shabbat, we're forbidden to enjoy a fire on Shabbat. So that means in the evening, no light, and if it's cold, no heat. The rabbinic leadership revolted against that. Now, up until that point, people would light lamps in their houses, making sure there were the proper quality of oil and so forth, so they wouldn't go out. So you'd have light Shabbat evening, and if necessary, a way of keeping the house warm. We don't need that here in Florida, but in other parts of the world, people needed it. Instead of just doing that, the rabbis created the ritual of the Shabbat candle blessing. Asher kichanu b'mitzvotav, who sanctified us by his commandments, vitzivanu, and commanded us, lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, to light the light of Shabbat. It is a commandment because it is part of God's commandment that Shabbat be a time of light and warmth, and I'll add an extra word, joy. Now, it is our custom, but other people have other customs, that you have 2 lights, 2 candles. The tradition tells us you have to have at least 2. It's a circular argument. In the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy, you have 2 different commandments for Shabbat. One is observe, one is remember. Zachor v'shamor, remember and observe. You remember those words from Lachadodi. You remember the 2 commandments for Shabbat. There are Jewish families that light additional lights, additional candles for every grandchild, for example. So if you're blessed with 30 grandchildren, you have a lot of lights there. But that's just a folk custom. The idea is that Shabbat is supposed to be a time of joy and of warmth, and it is a home ceremony to do these candle lightings, these light lightings at home. By the way, it is a specifically Reformed Jewish custom to have a candle lighting ceremony in the service. If conservative congregations do things like this, they picked it up from the Reform movement. I have tried unsuccessfully to figure out the origin of it. I know what the origin means. For people who couldn't light candles at home, at least we do it together as a community. Now I'm going to jump ahead to wine. Again, originally a home ceremony. as part of your celebratory dinner, you would have wine. You would have wine anyway because we in this country, you go into a restaurant, they give everybody a glass of water. In pre-modern world, you wouldn't dare drink the water. People drank wine with their meals. It was just taken for granted. There was nothing all that out of the ordinary about it. But on festive occasions, maybe wine would make us feel a little more relaxed, a little happier. And this too is part of the Jewish tradition. When there would be people who would be traveling from town to town and didn't have a home to go to for a Shabbat meal, in the Middle Ages, the custom was added to the Friday night service of having a Kiddush there in addition to the Kiddush at home, so those travelers could take advantage of that commandment to enjoy, to celebrate Shabbat. Now, I have to emphasize, in a Jewish context, I shouldn't have to say this. If I were speaking to a group of Christians, I would. The wine is nothing more than wine. Christians see a lot more in the wine than we do, under any circumstances whatsoever. And I can't help but think of examples when there have been individual Christians or groups of Christians visiting a congregation wanting to learn more about us. I remember one young man said to me, "You have communion." And I said, "We do?" "No, we don't." "I saw you do it." I said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, you had a cup of wine up there, didn't you?" And I tried to explain to him the difference. I don't know if I succeeded. I tried. Now, the key words of the Kiddush. I'm talking about the whole business, not just saying Borei Pri Hagafen. If I decide with my lunch this afternoon, before I eat, if I decide I want a glass of wine, and I don't, but that's another story, I would say before I drink the wine, Borei Pri Hagafen, I'm praising God for creating the fruit of the vine. But in the Kiddush, we go on and end with the words, praising God, Mekadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies the Sabbath, who makes the Sabbath separate. So I'm not sanctifying the wine. I'm praising God who sanctifies the Sabbath. And I think these distinctions, I'm looking at some notes I wrote down because there is so much that we need to say about this. It is unbelievable. The misunderstandings are unbelievably there staring us in our faces, especially if we put our wine and our bread together, because you know these things have enormous theological significance in the Christian world as they don't for us. So let's jump ahead. Bread. Bread means bread. I'm going to talk about challah for a minute. Again, I'm going to, I'll say something else first. The braided egg bread that we call challah, which we have on festival occasions, if it's Shabbat, if it's a bar mitzvah lunch, you have to have a challah that's bigger than the bar mitzvah boy or the bat mitzvah girl. On Rosh Hashanah, we have a round challah at the cycle of the year. Challah historically is a word that refers to the grain sacrifice in the temple. We think of animal sacrifices. There were also vegetable sacrifices. We would always say, Hamotzi lecha min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth, when we would eat any kind of bread. It's not just for challah, it's not just on Shabbat, okay? In Eastern Europe, the idea of a festival bread, a braided egg bread, developed separate from the Jewish world. If you don't believe what I'm going to say, I'm going to suggest you look something up on Wikipedia. And I will spell this for you. And if you don't remember it, get in touch with me. I'll give you the references. The Polish word, which would be spelled C-H-A-L with a slash, a bar in the L, K-I, chaka. Now, forgive me, my Polish pronunciation leaves a lot to be desired. Even when I understand the certain things, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. They will show you a picture and you'll say, my God, that's a challah. Now, I'm going to give you another suggestion. Look up the Czech word vanochka, and you see the picture, and there's a challah there. In other words, we picked up from the surrounding society, nothing wrong with that, the idea of having a festival bread, which is a braided egg bread. And the vanochka is used on many occasions in the Czech world, but primarily for Christmas. But why not? We celebrate. Wine is universal, bread is universal, and it seems in East Central Europe, braided egg breads are universal. Now, not all Jews call challah challah. If this rings a bell with anybody, Berkus is the word that is used in many German Jewish communities. Now, how do you prepare? How do you eat challah? I'm not suggesting any of you are going to do this. I'm not criticizing anybody who doesn't do it this way. This is more a class in history, okay? Traditionally speaking, we would have on our table for Shabbat 2 loaves. Why 2? Because when our ancestors wandered through the desert and God provided food from the heavens, there was a double portion on Shabbat, so people wouldn't have to go out and gather it on Shabbat. So that is why you will see in many pictures, many challah pictures, 2 of the loaves. You cover them up with a challah cover. A comment of mine, which my family has heard me say on multiple occasions, challah covers make wonderful gifts, especially wedding gifts. You can't have too many of them. And some of them are absolutely beautiful. If you don't have a beautiful one, you can use a plain cloth. Before you say hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and having bread makes the meal, technically speaking, a meal as opposed to a snack. And in so many ways of thinking, bread is the mainstay of your meal. That's how people filled themselves up. We eat too much bread, but that is how people filled themselves up. Before you eat your bread, you have rituals you need to go through. Number 1, wash your hands. And this is not motivated by the pandemic right now. I'm not talking about washing hands with soap and water for how many seconds and how hot the water is. If any of you have seen the traditional situation where people would fill a cup with water and pour it 3 times 3 on each hand, that is a ritual hand washing which is left over from ancient times. After you finish washing your hands, you praise God because God has commanded us concerning the washing of the hands. Then you take the challah, you break off a piece, some people cut off a piece, some people sprinkle salt on it, some dip it in salt. The salt, by the way, refers to sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem. And this is what you would see in a very traditional Jewish home. I forgot something, forgive me. In sequence, while the challah is being baked. Now, I'm going to give you an example which maybe you have seen. If you bought manischewitz or other kind of matzah, and if in your boredom you're reading what it says on the box, it says challah is taken. Matzah is a form of bread, and historically, traditionally, the person baking the bread would take off a little bit and toss it into the oven. Oven doesn't mean the electric oven we have, it means a real flame. And that is, again, reminiscent of an ancient sacrifice. Okay, we've washed our hands. We have said, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth. Bread is bread is food. And I've dealt with this in previous congregations where, let's say, the person who is dealing with what we have in the service we used to have in my previous congregation, the challah, the hamotzi, at the oneg, not as part of the service. And sometimes he goes, I'm terribly sorry, Rabbi, I don't know what you're going to do. I couldn't find a challah, so I had to bring regular bread. You won't be able to say hamotzi. No, hamotzi is for every meal. Misunderstandings. Now, I've left something significant out of the picture. And remember, I didn't talk about food. If you want me to, we'll bring in food experts. When we are finished our meal, and this isn't just on Shabbat, it should be for every meal, we say the Birkat HaMazon. Birkat is bracha concerning, blessing concerning food. And these are longer prayers of thanksgiving. Now, I've said in the non-Jewish world, people often say something or another before you eat. We say a very short something before we eat and a longer something afterwards. I have joked around and saying we eat first and then we say thank you. And we say thank you no matter how small the meal is, because sometimes people couldn't afford a big meal, but still those senses of thanksgiving. I have tried on a few of our communal meals to do the Birkat HaMazon. Some of us sing along, some of us don't. I'm going to try again. But the meal is bookended with hamotzi at the beginning and Birkat HaMazon at the end. Now, other bookends. We begin with, after we do the candle blessing, with the Kiddush. And we end with the words, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Sanctifies the Sabbath. Sanctified is a fancy word. Who knows what it means? It really means makes the Sabbath separate. The end of the Sabbath, we have Havdalah. And what does Havdalah mean? Separation, distinction. They're near synonyms. So we begin by separating the Sabbath from the week. We end by separating the week from the Sabbath, the idea of separation. Now, what's the purpose behind all of my doing all of this and talking about this? And please make comments, suggestions, share your experiences in your own lives. We've all had different experiences. I wanted to walk through the history of all of these practices. I also feel it's important for all of us to know about this. So if Uncle so-and-so's son's bar mitzvah and you get invited and they do all these fancy dancy things before and after the meal, you at least have some idea what's going on. It used to be the case, by the way, I think it still is, that when secular diplomats from Israel were sent abroad, people who did not have the religious background or education, they had to be prepared for a couple of things. So Ambassador so-and-so is invited to attend a Shabbat morning service at the synagogue and speak afterwards. Well, obviously, he's going to go, and maybe he will be honored with an aliyah. So he has to know what to say and what to do. Similarly, at big public dinners, the ambassador or the ambassador's assistant may be asked to lead in the Birkat HaMazon. And it used to be the case, I'm assuming it still is, that everyone was reviewed, trained to do this so there wouldn't be embarrassment. And again, I have felt, and I'm going to speak now from my experience from, it's over 35 years ago now, when I was a Hillel rabbi, where we had Jews from all kinds of different backgrounds getting together for Shabbat meals. We put on meals every Friday night. We get about 100 people. We had our own cook. It was a challenge, to say the least. It's especially a challenge when the cook calls at 4 p.m. and quits. That's another story. We won't talk about that. One of the arguments about not going in the restaurant business. But there would be kids who would come from Reformed Jewish homes, some from conservative Jewish homes, some from non-observant Jewish homes who weren't familiar with what was going on. And I hope that what they saw was part of their ongoing Jewish experience and education. Now, I'm inviting all of you to a virtual Shabbat dinner this Friday night. We will have our cocktail party. Why not? We will socialize. Why not? Then we will virtually pick up, we won't, but we will, we'll pick up and go into the other room, into our virtual dining room in our home, which isn't big enough to feed the 50, 60 people who've been coming to our cocktail party. But you can imagine and let your imagination go. Here's the big table, and here's so-and-so sitting, and here's so-and-so sitting, and so forth. And we will go through the Shabbat rituals, review what we just did. And I think it could be a very, very interesting experience doing it not just by rote, so to speak, not just, hey, this is the way we've always done it, but by doing it in a more informed way. It's also interesting, while we're talking about, I mentioned Hanukkah versus wedding presents, some congregations at a bar mitzvah, and I think things are changing now, but anyway, you would give the girl as a gift from the congregation a nice set of Shabbat candle holders, and the boy a nice little Kiddush cup. Again, there's no reason why you can't have many of these. We have a very nice but very small collection of Kiddush cups. One, if I may say, was presented to my paternal grandfather when he stepped down as president of his congregation after serving, and put on your seatbelts, as you say, serving as president of that congregation for 25 years consecutively. There weren't term limits in those days. Stuart is smiling, I can see. He felt, my dear grandfather, who was a very loving man, but also he had to be the boss, he felt he owned the place. And as I've told you on many occasions, this was a more traditional congregation where instead of having our form of fundraising, aliyahs for the high holidays would be auctioned off, something the Reform movement never felt comfortable with. Well, he had to be the winner of all the auctions, and everybody knew this, so they bid against him, knowing that no matter what, he had to win. And at a certain point of compassion, they stopped bidding. So my clearest recollection of the first Rosh Hashanah after I became a bar mitzvah, Grandpa decided that his youngest grandson, yours truly, had to have an aliyah on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, because we went to his service on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And the bidding, and I've always joked, if he had put that money away and invested it for me, things would be much nicer today. And maybe, well, that's another story. But these are all the sort of fun things of Jewish ritual, which I hope I can say we can enjoy whether we do them or not. We can enjoy and see the spiritual value in things, whether we do them or not. So I hope I've shared some interesting information. I certainly find it fascinating. Look up these Polish and Czech and their Russian variants too of braided egg breads. Don't imagine that back in the olden days that Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah lit Sabbath candles the way our grandmothers did, nor did they bake challah the way we do today. Now, if I'm going to follow my protocols that I've been given by my producer and director, I have to send to Corin the message that I have finished this part, the end of the recording session, so nothing more will be recorded, and then we can have an open discussion, none of which will be in the public domain, so you don't have to worry about what you said or what people will see. So I've set that point.